Yanfei was always a character I admired and wanted to play for the longest time, but I never really had the chance to max her out. With Natlan still a bit away, I had that chance. So here's 7 advanced tips for every Yanfei main. Believe it or not, this is only the second episode that I do on a 4-star character. Firstly, let's talk about her best combo. Her gameplay revolves around charged attacks that get stronger via Scarlet's heals. They have no internal cooldown, which is a really powerful detail to have on a Pyro unit. Every charge attack that interacts with a Cryo or Hydro aura will almost always melt or vaporize. Without your burst, you will generally stop at 3 normal attacks to farm stacks even at C6, as going up to the 4th requires a new attack string to start, which takes time. During your burst, which gives you a stack per second, you can instead resort to 2 normals into a charge attack. And this is going to be your basic 90% of the time combo, both with and without C6, since it will always give you full stacks. Although it's important to say that if you're playing a Vaporize team and your Hydro source is rather weak, like a solo Yelan, you might still opt for 3 normals before each charger attack, so the Yelan triggers twice in that time frame. It can also be done when playing this duo, just for their overall damage. And a quick normal attack, just to trigger their burst, can also be done right before a skill or a burst. Yanfei can also buffer her charger attack, which means starting to hold your attack key a little bit earlier, right after you pressed it for the normal and during its animation. It will basically let them come up much faster. This might require a bit of practice. And another tip that will require even more practice is the ability for many Catalyst users to perform an N1 walk combo, which is basically a normal attack followed by a slight movement, which resets the attack string, so that you can just spam the first normal instead of a full attack string. This attack is basically faster and stronger than N2 and N3 for the time it takes. But unlike characters like Lee, where it's much easier to do, on Yanfei it will require lots of practice, so it might not be for everyone. Now take a look at this setup. I freeze my enemy and have full Scarlet shields. I'm ready for a big charger attack, but it doesn't melt. And charge attacks have no internal cooldown, so why wouldn't it melt? Turns out the reason is that Yanfei's charge attacks are actually blunt. Blunt attacks are a category of attacks that are able to damage Geo objects, certain shields, and shatter enemies. Shatter has a priority over other reactions when interacting with a frozen enemy. And that's the reason why we don't melt, but we get an instance of physical damage. You can fix this by having a frozen aura on the enemy plus some underlying cryo or hydro, so that after the shatter, with the same hit, you also trigger vaporize and melt. This is an unfortunate but interesting detail about her attacks. It's useful against some enemies. Yanfei can do substantial damage to certain shields, for example, but for some teams, especially with low cryo application, it can be pretty detrimental. Her burst and skill are also blunt. And looking into details on her kit, I found out something else that's really interesting. Her Ascension 4 is an extra hit on the target when your charger attack crits. This explosion has heal lag. And you probably already know where I'm going with this. We can plunge off of it. This is called Dragonstrike. Certain attacks stop in-game timers and animations for a brief time, which, during a jump, simply makes you jump slightly higher. High enough that you can plunge off of it. Diluc is famous for this, well, before Xianyun, because Claymore characters have tons of heal lag on their attacks. On Yanfei, this is the only instance, and once you master the timing, it's honestly not even too hard to do. It's pretty fun because technically it could be used for a triple reaction setup, since Charge Attack, Ascension 4 and Plunge all have no ICT. You're not of course doing this normally, but it's always interesting and can make for a pretty cool showcase. And now it's time to address the elephant in the room, which is Tankfei, the so famous support Yanfei build. There are a few reasons to play a support Yanfei. First of all, Catalyst means Trailing Tales of the Dragon Slayers, one of the best Catalysts in the game. But she has more options, like Prototype Ember or Favonius Codex. She's a Pyro character, which is half a Pyro Resonance. She can of course hold any interesting or buffing artifacts like Noblesse or Instructor, and has some energy generation on her skill and the ability to apply Pyro anytime she wants, which is important for some of her best teams, like VV Vape. But the thing that makes this build work is her Constellation 4, which is a beefy 15 seconds Pyro shield on burst cast. The shield scales 45% over max HP. It's comparable to a Diona shield. Now, for a late game account with tons of options and characters, all I'm saying here is pure copium. But for people in the middle, maybe Imaginarium Theater strugglers, She can be a fantastic defensive unit, especially in teams where everything she has to offer works well. The investment necessary is extremely low. Talents can be kept at level 1 and the only 2 stats she really cares about are energy recharge, as much as you can give her, and the rest goes to HP percentage for the shield. She's not Thoma, but Thoma is not always there, not always the best. An Arlecchino Shivers team can of course use Bennett, but what if he's in another team? A Yanfei with Noblesse and Thrilling Tales is giving Arlecchino a whopping 68% attack and a shield. But aside from this build, Yanfei is a classic pyro damage dealer. We have tons of this already. She's open to all the classic teams you will play any of the others, and she's not going to get the numbers of a Hu Tao or Arlecchino, but I think she can have one advantage over them. And that's how little circle impact can affect her. Very clear in this Abyss how I can place one Bennett burst and use it even when a new enemy spawns on the opposite side of the Abyss. And honestly, pushed to her limits, even without 5-star constellations in the team, you can get some very big numbers out. She also got buffed a lot thanks to Fontaine. With Fudin and the team, she has 2 incredible new weapon options and an artifact set, which all perform better compared to previous weapons and Crimson Witch or Wanderer's Troop. And since we're talking about Fudina, keep in mind that she's not enough Hydro by herself, so I love to either pair her with something Hydro infused, like Kazuha, but that's pretty hard to play, or a second Hydro like Yelan. This is probably one of her best and most comfortable teams right now. She also has some pairing with the just released Emily, but it's pretty much a downgrade compared to Shanling in my opinion. I want to wish best of luck to anyone getting into this great and really fun to play character. As always, these videos don't give out general and more basic tips, but feel free to comment for any doubt. While you look at my set graph, I have a few tips that can be used by Yanfei vape teams in this episode for Kazuha, if you want to check something else out. Thank you for watching and see you next time.